for me to return when it was time.
I assume you're ready to look in that lake.
Raiden said, tossing back the last of his drink. I was only too happy to escape the apparently visible by all illusion on the dance floor before we collided again, further wrecking my tenuous grasp on reality. Alina was dead. I knew it in my bones. I knew it with utter and complete certainty. And if she wasn't dead, nothing I thought I knew could be trusted. Not one damn thing. Easier to turn away from the illusion than confront it. I tossed back my drink and stood. Why not? I thought, acerbically. Could things get any worse? 16. What a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. I should never think that. I know better. Still, I persist, and every damned time the universe seizes the challenge on bullish horns, stomps its hoof, and snorts, "Hey, Michaela Lane, just said she doesn't think things can get worse. We'll show her." Raiden took us to the dungeon level I'd glimpsed yesterday on his office monitors. Not to Dagis's cell, but to a small stone room down a narrow passageway. I trailed my fingers along the cool, damp stone of the corridor, skimming a marbling of brightly colored moss on the walls. A part of nearly iridescent algae staining a strangely luminous skein on the stone. It was gloomy, gray, and cold in the subterranean chamber. I despise being underground. I wondered if anyone was with Dagis or if they'd left him alone to deal with his transformation. Although I listened intently, I heard no sound, no anguished baying, no tortured groans. Barons, why are we in the dungeon? I asked, looking around for ancient manacles bolted into the stone or something of the like. Perhaps an Iron Maiden or a few blood-stained racks.
Precaution, nothing more. If you go, as you call it, batshit crazy, there are fewer people to kill down here.
How much?
I'd still leave through the club, meaning I could still destroy everyone within it.
She's like, alone.
Maybe we should go out into the middle of a field, far from any town. He slanted me a look.
You're not going to lose it. You're not going to open the book tonight.
Yeah.
We merely want to get the lay of your inner landscape.
I heaved an audible sigh of relief. Then let's get on with it. I shot Raiden a look as he closed us in the narrow stone cell. Since you know I know everything, what the heck is the deal with Kat and Castello?
Another thing a wiser woman would mention.
I'm only mentioning it to you, not anyone else, I said. So what gives? He kicked a straight-backed chair toward me.
Sit.
I clamped my mouth shut on, I prefer to stand. No point in wasting energy just to vent my dissatisfaction with the current state of my life on everyone around me. I sat. After a moment, I let my lids flutter closed, although I didn't need to. I remembered all too well during that time I'd been a darker version of myself, letting my eyes go only slightly out of focus to drift into the place of power I called my dark, glassy lake. Scooping up runes, floating on the surface. Power I'd naively believed my birthright, some part of my she-seer heritage, only to learn they'd been temptations strewn by the she-sedu, gifts to seduce and entice. Never mine at all. I wondered for perhaps the first time with my intellect precisely where my inner lake actually was. Talking about it to Raiden made me perceive it differently. Instead of seeming normal, I'd found it peculiar. Why did I have a lake inside me? Did ever she see her? Was it simply my chosen visualization of an inner power source? different for all of us? With constant calamity around me, I'd never gotten time to sit down with the sisters of my bloodline to ask questions, compare notes. I frowned. Now that I'd added my brain to the mix, trying to pinpoint the metaphysical coordinates of my dark glassy lake, as if I might establish some quantum latitude and longitude, was difficult. The place proved abruptly elusive. I inhaled deep, exhaled slow, willing myself to relax. Sink, sink, don't think, I murmured in my mind. Nothing. Not even a puddle inside anywhere. I opened my eyes thinking I needed to refocus and try again. Barons gave me a look. Hang on, I said. Give me a minute.
Don't play games with me, Mac,
Ryden warned. I'm not, I said. It's not easy. I've spent months trying to stay away from the place, and now you expect me to dive right in. I've trained myself to never even think about it, although I didn't always succeed. Letting my gaze shift slightly out of focus, I mentally envisioned a giant lake, glassy and deep. I paid careful attention to the details, the pebbled shore, the faint light from what seemed to be a distant sky. I lavished attention on the sleek black surface, told myself I couldn't wait to swim, climbed up on a large rock, and when I'd gotten the scene exactly right, closed my eyes, leapt into the air and dove. I crashed into the ground, hard. Not one bloody drop of water anywhere. Fuck! I snapped, rubbing my head. It hurt, as if I'd actually hit a rock with it, and my arms felt bruised. I looked at Barons. I can't find it.
Try again,
Ryden ordered. I did. And again. And again and again. Driving us all crazy with repeated failure.
You're too tense.
Ryden growled.
For fuck's sake, you don't stalk an orgasm. You enjoy its arrival. Bloody talk about bloody orgasms with your own bloody woman, Hein.
Baron said tightly.
You don't know a thing about her orgasms, and never will.
Ryden shot him a dark look.
It was a metaphor.
I never stalk an orgasm. I don't have to with Barons, I said.
Too the fuck much information, Mac.
Ryden said. You're the one who brought up orgasms.
And he never will again.
Baron said, pointedly. Everybody shut up. I'm trying to concentrate. Now I was thinking about orgasms. I considered Ryden's advice. Maybe I was trying too hard. An hour later, I was dripping sweat, my head was pounding, and my arms felt like I'd been delivering karate chops to brick walls. I can't get there, I finally said wearily. I don't know why. Ryden regarded me through narrowed eyes.
You said you thought it was a Shisia place.
I inclined my head, waiting.
Barons said you ate.
Aha! Unseelie flesh. I pounced on the excuse, enormously relieved. So it is a Shisia place, and that's why I can't find it. I can't possibly see my lake right now. I'd begun to fear the Shisadu was so quiet of late because it had been stealthily rearranging my internal furniture, adding things I might want to use, planting booby traps. Could it do that? Ryden rolled his eyes.
Outstanding. Meet Mac, the junkie.
I am not,
How many times have you eaten it in the past week?
he demanded. Twice. But I had to the first time because I was going down the cliff, and the Guardians were shooting at me the second time, I defended.
I'm sure you'll have to the next time, too.
I am not an addict,
How the bloody hell long does the high last, anyway?
Ryden growled. I shrugged. Don't know exactly. 3 days or so. I should be myself again in a couple of days. Immensely irritable and tired, but myself. He looked at Barons.
Don't let her eat it again. She makes her own decisions,
he said, but he shot me a look.
We need information, Miss Lane. I would prefer you refrain for a time.
Great. One of my 2 ball fortifying techniques that were keeping me strong, sex with Barons and eating unseelie flesh, was now lost. I was just thinking what an anticlimactic night this was turning out to be when Riordan opened the door. Christian McKelter stood on the other side. 17. Knows everybody's disapproval. I should have worshipped her sooner. 3 hours earlier. Jada didn't have to wear the red dress. It was a choice. Men on every planet, in every realm, fae or human, shared inherent characteristics. They didn't like to kill a beautiful woman. At first. They wanted other things. At first. Beauty was one of many weapons. It was why she'd abandoned her ragged haircut to grow it long again. But curly and wild, it had been far too easy for an opponent to grab a fistful, a liability in any battle. She'd learned to scrape it back high out of her face, sometimes tuck a low braid into the collar of her shirt. She didn't have to dance either. That, too, was a choice. But when she walked into Chester's, one of the 9 caught her eye across the dance floor and beckoned with such in-your-face enthusiasm and happiness to see her that she couldn't resist. Lore. The man was a beast. A primitive caveman who loved being what he was. Blunt, blatantly sexual, with a voracious appetite for rock and roll, brawls, and hot blondes. He was prone to proposition a woman by saying,
Hey, wanna fuck?
And scored a ridiculous amount of the time with his Viking good looks and that hint of something dirty, kinky, raw, just beneath the surface, locked, loaded, and ready to blast a woman's inhibitions to dust. They'd had something when she was younger. Not that kind of something. A bond that had been innocent yet knowing. An awareness that they were 2 people who were precisely what they were. No apologies, no excuses. He'd appreciated who she'd been then, and from the look on his face, he was willing to appreciate her now. He'd once bought her steak and potatoes, had trailed her, making sure she stayed safe. He'd offered advice the night Riordan dragged her off, after she'd defied him and slaughtered half the patrons in one of his sub-clubs, helped her escape the room upstairs when the boss locked her in. He'd encouraged her impulsiveness and belligerence, and for that reason alone, she should avoid him. She'd turned her back on those character flaws years ago, but the music was seductive and the song playing was one of her favorites, and despite the icy facade she projected, she knew the heat she had inside. She didn't deny it. Denying would have made her weaker. Heat was strength. It was resilience. She channeled it, shaped it into purpose, like everything else. Sexuality, too, was power. Lore moved toward her, pushing through the crowd, completely ignoring the many hot blondes looking his way, his grin wide and only for her. She approached him, allowing herself a faint smile. They met in the middle of the dance floor.
Hey, kid.
He purred.
Looking good, honey. Nice to see you back.
She could count on 2 fingers those who'd been happy to see her.
Fuck, I always look good. I was born looking good. Dance?
With Hosier inviting his lover to take him to church, she moved into Lore's body with effortless grace. following the tempo of his hips, the muscle of his powerful torso. He danced from the groin, as most powerful, centered men did, easy to match. On one of the worlds she'd briefly visited, nature itself had danced, sinuous vines draping from trees, moving to a rhythm she'd not been able to hear. At first she was wary, regarding them as threats, but after nearly a week on that world, she'd seen a slender trailing plant heal a wounded animal with its dance. And one night, under 3 full moons, she'd taken off her clothes and gone native. Pretended to be part of the vegetation, imitating the sensual undulations until she finally found the rhythm with her body. It healed her, too. The wounds on her back had closed, expelling the infection, leaving only scars. Now, she half closed her eyes and followed the lead of Lore's hips, dropped her head back, arched her neck, and gave herself over completely to the music. The body had needs that couldn't be ignored. It needed to run, to fight, to eat, to breathe, to move. There were other needs too, which now that she was back on this world, surrounded by so many people with complicated feelings, had been making their presence known. She wasn't ready to deal with them. Nothing. No one had touched her for a long time. It was difficult to process Lore's body so close to hers, moving in tandem with her own. So she pretended he was a vine and she was dancing in a great, dark forest, safer than most places because there were no upright creatures on that world, and the dance was only for her, to let her soul breathe, to revel in being alive one more day. In her mind, moonlight kissed her skin, a gentle, fragrant breeze rippled her hair. Abandoned to the moment, the beat, the freedom of thinking no further ahead or back than now.
Food for
Oh,
Monday.
honey, keep dancing like that. You're gonna get me killed.
But
Lore said close to her ear. I doubt that, she said dryly.
I figure it's worth dying for. If only to get off on the look on that fuck's face.
She didn't dissemble, didn't ask who. She knew who, and he knew she did. Lore was a hammer. He called it like he saw it, pounded words like nails into conversation, and didn't care what anyone thought of him.
Or I should say the night.
And what is the look on that fuck's face? She murmured. He's behind me. I can't see him. Lore laughed and spun them so she could see Ryodan standing on the edge of the dance floor, tall, powerful, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled back, cuff glinting, watching, thunderclouds in his eyes. Once she'd seen him last. Once she'd watched him fuck. A lifetime ago. Their eyes locked. He took 2 steps toward her, and she flared her nostrils, cut him a cool look. He stopped. Lore slid an arm around her waist, turned her away. Then why didn't he find me? She said. She wanted to know how hard he'd searched, how he'd reacted, if he'd mounted a rescue, and how extensive it had been. She'd had no one to ask that wouldn't promptly report back to him. Lore wouldn't carry the tale. They'd shared secrets in the past.
Oh, kid. He tried. As soon as he heard you were missing. We didn't know you were gone for a couple weeks. Mac didn't tell Ryodan right away.
Jada cultivated fluidity, resisting the urge to tense. Mac didn't tell you right away that I went into the hole. Lore shook his head. She was momentarily breathless. She'd believed they were all out hunting for her, worrying, moving mountains to find her. She'd waited, living by WWRD. What would Ryodan do?
Boss said Mac was chomping at the bit to go after you, but Barons vetoed it. Said if she followed you through, you'd just keep running.
True, she acknowledged. She'd been running as if the hounds of hell were on her heels that night, determined to outrun everything, especially herself. She wouldn't have stopped if Mac had followed her. She'd have leapt into the nearest mirror in the hall. But Truth, the pernicious bitch, didn't make her feel better. Why didn't she tell Riordan?
Dunno. You gotta ask her that. But, honey, it's not like those two get along real well. They sure weren't spending any time together. Maybe she was giving you time to find your way out. Maybe she had her own problems.
Jada did the math. She'd been gone 5.5 years, and they hadn't even started looking for her until 2 weeks after she'd gotten back. She'd spent those weeks coldly combing the country, amassing her wandering army of she-seers who'd come to Dublin for one reason or another, inspiring their loyalty with her strength and laser focus, implementing the plans she'd made wandering through hell, trying to figure out how to regain what she'd lost by coming home. Years that felt like centuries had passed for her. It had been a single week for those she'd counted friends. She closed her eyes, finding her center. The place where she felt no pain, only purpose. When she'd fixed herself firmly there, she opened her eyes, kissed Lore lightly on the cheek, and thanked him for the dance. Then she turned to find Riordan deliberately late for their meeting. He was gone.
I don't have any relationships.
I thought we were having a meeting, Jada said as she entered Riordan's office.
That
We
is
are.
part of the day.
He said, not taking his eyes from the monitor he was watching beyond her head. I'd hardly call the two of us a meeting.
What would you call us?
Us, he'd said, with interrogative inflection, as if there was an us. Once, she'd thought them Batman and Robin, two superheroes saving the world. Was that a bona fide question with proper punctuation? She mocked.
Danny needed things to fight. I was the logical choice. Even something so small as improper punctuation kept her distracted.
What are you saying? That you're not really endlessly irritating? You just irritated me endlessly to keep me occupied?
No need to go hunting dragons when the one right next to you keeps yanking your chain. And you had so very many chains to yank back then.
She stared at him, but he still wasn't looking at her. That was exactly what he'd done, kept her racing from one thing to the next, provoking her so incessantly that even when she wasn't with him, she'd been fuming about how much he annoyed her, planning how to one-up him the next time, or impress him, get him to look at her with respect, admiration. God, she'd hero-worshipped this man, constructed endless fantasies around him. He looked at her then, sharply, hard, and she belatedly remembered his ability to skim minds, hoped she hadn't thought that last part loud and on the top of her brain. On the off chance she had, she